Top 111 Sigmund Freud quotes. Smoking is indispensable if one has nothing to kiss. He that has eyes to see and ears to hear may convince himself that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips, betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. It might be said of psychoanalysis that if you give it your little finger, it will soon have your whole hand. The more perfect a person is on the outside, the more demons they have on the inside. What a distressing contrast there is between the radiant intelligence of the child and the feeble mentality of the average adult. The great question that has never been answered, and which I have not yet been able to answer, despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul, is, what does a woman want? The only unnatural sexual behavior is none at all. Humor is a means of obtaining pleasure in spite of the distressing effects that interface with it. Adolescent stage in the development of the human race from which humanity should free itself. Talk therapy turns hysterical misery to mundane unhappiness. Only a good-for-nothing is not interested in his past. In the last analysis, the entire field of psychology may reduce to biological electrochemistry. The poets and philosophers before me discovered the unconscious. What I discovered was the scientific method by which the unconscious can be studied. Instinct of love toward an object demands a mastery to obtain it, and if a person feels they can't control the object or feel threatened by it, they act negatively toward it. Sexuality is the key to the problem of the psychoneuroses and of the neuroses in general. No one who disdains the key will ever be able to unlock the door. The most complicated achievements of thought are possible without the assistance of consciousness. Children are completely egoistic. They feel their needs intensely and strive ruthlessly to satisfy them. The price we pay for our advance in civilization is a loss of happiness through the heightening of the sense of guilt. Illusions commend themselves to us because they save us pain and allow us to enjoy pleasure instead. We must therefore accept it without complaint when they sometimes collide with a bit of reality against which they are dashed to pieces. Look into the depths of your own soul and learn first to know yourself. Then you will understand why this illness was bound to come upon you, and perhaps you will thenceforth avoid falling ill. The behavior of a human being in sexual matters is often a prototype for the whole of his other modes of reaction in life. The scope of one's personality is defined by the magnitude of that problem which is capable of driving a person out of his wits. When a man is freed of religion, he has a better chance to live a normal and wholesome life. Once again, only religion can answer the question of the purpose of life. One can hardly be wrong in concluding that the idea of life having a purpose stands and falls with the religious system. We may say that hysteria is a caricature of an artistic creation, a compulsion neurosis a caricature of a religion, and a paranoiac delusion a caricature of a philosophic system. The devil would be the best way out as an excuse for God. In that way he would be playing the same part as an agent of economic discharge as the Jew does in the world of the Aryan ideal. But even so, one can hold God responsible for the existence of the devil just as well as for the existence of the wickedness, which the devil embodies. Religion belonged to the infancy of humanity. Now that humanity had come of age, it should be left behind. Toward the person who has died we adopt a special attitude, something like admiration for someone who has accomplished a very difficult task. If the truth of religious doctrines is dependent on an inner experience that bears witness to the truth, what is one to make of the many people who do not have that experience? The woman who refuses to see her sexual organs as mere wood chips designed to make the man's life more comfortable is in danger of becoming a lesbian, an active, phallic woman, an intellectual virago with a fire of her own. The lesbian body is a particularly pernicious and depraved version of the female body in general. It is susceptible to autoeroticism, clitoral pleasure, and self-actualization. The ego is first and foremost a bodily ego. It is not merely a surface entity, but is itself the projection of a surface. If we wish to find an anatomical analogy for it, we can best identify it with the cortical homunculus of the anatomists, which stands on its head in the cortex, sticks up its heels, faces. A hero is a man who stands up manfully against his father and in the end victoriously overcomes him. Creativity is an attempt to resolve a conflict generated by unexpressed biological impulses, such that unfulfilled desires are the driving force of the imagination, and they fuel our dreams and daydreams. A man who has been the indisputable favorite of his mother keeps for life the feeling of a conqueror. It is easy to see that the ego is that part of the ID which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. It is impossible to escape the impression that people commonly use false standards of measurement, that they seek power, success, and wealth for themselves and admire them in others, and that they underestimate what is of true value in life. No, our science is no illusion. But an illusion it would be to suppose that what science cannot give us we can get elsewhere. Let us consider the polarity of love and hate. Now, clinical observation shows not only that love is with unexpected regularity accompanied by hate, ambivalence, and not only that in human relationships hate is frequently a forerunner of love, but also that in many circumstances hate changes into love and love into hate. Even if all parts of a problem seem to fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, one has to remember that the probable need not necessarily be the truth and the truth not always probable. A strong egoism is a protection against disease, but in the last resort we must begin to love in order that we may not fall ill and must fall ill if, in consequence of frustration, we cannot love. If you want to endure life, prepare yourself for death. Religion is the process of unconscious wish fulfillment where, for certain people, if the process did not take place it would put them in self-danger of coming to mental harm, being unable to cope with the idea of a godless, purposeless life. Men are strong so long as they represent a strong idea. They become powerless when they oppose it. When someone abuses me I can defend myself, but against praise I am defenseless. I have found little good about human beings. In my experience, most of them are trash. The first human who hurled an insult instead of a stone was the founder of civilization. If children could, if adults knew. A woman should soften but not weaken a man. The Mosaic religion had been a father religion, Christianity became a son religion. The old God, the Father, took second place, Christ, the Son, stood in his stead, just as in those dark times every son had longed to do. There is no doubt that the resistance of the conscious and unconscious ego operates under the sway of the pleasure principle. It seeks to avoid the unpleasure which would be produced by the liberation of the repressed. There is little that gives children greater pleasure than when a grown-up lets himself down to their level, renounces his oppressive superiority and plays with them as an equal. Properly speaking, the unconscious is the real psychic. Its inner nature is just as unknown to us as the reality of the external world, and it is just as imperfectly reported to us through the data of consciousness, as is the external world through the indications of our sensory organs. Religion is an illusion, and it derives its strength from the fact that it falls in with our instinctual desires. Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but it is nothing to be ashamed of, no vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. A belligerent state permits itself every such misdeed, every such act of violence, as would disgrace the individual. Yes, America is gigantic, but a gigantic mistake. If it's not one thing, it's your mother. When one does not have what one wants, one must want what one has. Indeed, the great Leonardo da Vinci remained like a child for the whole of his life in more than one way. It is said that all great men are bound to retain some infantile part. Even as an adult he continued to play, and this was another reason why he often appeared uncanny and incomprehensible to his contemporaries. We find a place for what we lose. Although we know that after such a loss the acute stage of mourning will subside, we also know that we shall remain inconsolable and will never find a substitute. No matter what may fill the gap, even if it be filled completely, it nevertheless remains something else. When we share, that is poetry in the prose of life. We know less about the sexual life of little girls than of boys. But we need not feel ashamed of this distinction. After all, the sexual life of adult women is a dark continent for psychology. A fear of weapons is a sign of retarded sexual and emotional maturity. Life as we find it is too hard for us. It entails too much pain, too many disappointments, impossible tasks. We cannot do without palliative remedies. What is common in all these dreams is obvious. They completely satisfy wishes excited during the day which remain unrealized. They are simply and undisguisedly realizations of wishes. The pleasure principle long persists, however, as the method of working employed by the sexual instincts, which are so hard to educate, and, starting from those instincts, or in the ego itself, it often succeeds in overcoming the reality principle to the detriment of the organism as a whole. Our fascination with gold is related to the fantasies of early childhood. The whole life of instinct serves the one end of bringing about death. Everyone owes nature a death. Conservatism, however, is too often a welcome excuse for lazy minds, loath to adapt themselves to fast-changing conditions. I am not aware, however, that patients suffering from traumatic neurosis are much occupied in their waking lives with memories of their accident. Perhaps they are more concerned with not thinking of it. The inclination to aggression constitutes the greatest impediment to civilization. Words were originally magic, and the word retains much of its old magical power even today. Thinking is an experimental dealing with small quantities of energy, just as a general moves miniature figures over a map before setting his troops in action. Religion is an attempt to get control over the sensory world in which we are placed, by means of the wish world which we have developed inside us as a result of biological and psychological necessities. Civilized society is perpetually menaced with disintegration through this primary hostility of men towards one another. A certain degree of neurosis is of inestimable value as a drive, especially to a psychologist. Religion originates in the child's and young mankind's fears and need for help. It cannot be otherwise. The goal towards which the pleasure principle impels us, of becoming happy is not attainable, yet we may not, nay, cannot, give up the efforts to come nearer to realization of it by some means or other. The game replaces sexual enjoyment by pleasure in movement. I cannot face the idea of life without work. What would one do when ideas failed or words refused to come? It is impossible not to shudder at the thought. Analogies, it is true, decide nothing, but they can make one feel more at home. Religious illusion must bow to scientific truth. It is in total error about the nature of the true world. Only science is not an illusion. Civilized people have exchanged some part of their chances of happiness for a measure of security. A religion, even if it calls itself a religion of love, must be hard and unloving to those who do not belong to it. What progress we are making! In the Middle Ages they would have burned me. Now they are content with burning my books. Just as no one can be forced into belief, so no one can be forced into unbelief. This transmissibility of taboo is a reflection of the tendency, on which we have already remarked, for the unconscious instinct in the neurosis to shift constantly along associative paths onto new objects. A man like me cannot live without a hobby horse, a consuming passion, in Schiller's words, a tyrant. I have found my tyrant, and in his service I know no limits. My tyrant is psychology. It has always been my distant, beckoning goal, and now since I have hit upon the neuroses, it has come so much the nearer. America is a mistake, admittedly a gigantic mistake, but a mistake nevertheless. With words one man can make another blessed, or drive him to despair. Conscience is the internal perception of the rejection of a particular wish operating within us. Flowers are restful to look at. They have neither emotions nor conflicts. In human beings, pure masculinity or femininity is not to be found either in a psychological or biological sense. It could be ventured to understand obsessive-compulsive neurosis as the pathological counterpart of religious development, to define neurosis as an individual religiosity, to define religion as a universal obsessive-compulsive neurosis. The sexual wishes in regard to the mother become more intense, and the father is perceived as an obstacle to the. This gives rise to the Oedipus complex. We are never so vulnerable as when we love, and never so hopelessly unhappy as when we lose the object of our love. If a man has been his mother's undisputed darling, he retains throughout life the triumphant feeling, the confidence in success, which not seldom brings actual success along with it. No one who has seen a baby sinking back satiated from the breast and falling asleep with flushed cheeks and a blissful smile can escape the reflection that this picture persists as a prototype of the expression of sexual satisfaction in later life.